Yeah. Okay, so we are in part 7 of People Are Complicated. Now, King David's stories reveal that no single story captures our complex selves or gods. And again, these notes are on the church website. We're trying to get them up by Tuesday night or sometime on Wednesday, so you can access them. All the notes for the previous 6 parts are up there. So we're in 1 Samuel 19, 1 through 17 tonight. As we have done before, I'm going to read the text out loud. And as I do, note what rises to the surface for you, what questions the text brings to you, what you find odd, unusual. And we'll start with that. We'll start with what you notice about the text. So 1 Samuel 19, beginning of verse 1. Saul spoke with his son Jonathan and with all his servants about killing David. But Saul's son Jonathan took great delight in David. Jonathan told David, "My father Saul is trying to kill you. Therefore be on guard tomorrow morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself. I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak to my father about you. If I learn anything, I will tell you." Jonathan spoke well of David to his father Saul, saying to him, "The king should not sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his deeds have been of good service to you. For he took his life in his hand when he attacked the Philistine, and the Lord brought about a great victory for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against an innocent person by killing David without cause?" Saul heeded the voice of Jonathan. Saul swore, "As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death." So Jonathan called David and related all these things to him. Jonathan then brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as before. Again, there was war, and David went out to fight the Philistines. He launched a heavy attack on them so that they fled before him. Then an evil spirit from the Lord came upon Saul as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand while David was playing music. Saul sought to pin David to the wall with a spear, but he eluded Saul so that he struck the spear into the wall. David fled and escaped that night. Saul sent messengers to David's house to keep watch over him, planning to kill him in the morning. David's wife Michal told him, "If you do not save your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." So Michal let David down through the window. He fled away and escaped. Michal took an idol and laid it on the bed. She put a net of goat's hair on its head and covered it with the clothes. When Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, "He's sick." Then Saul sent the messengers to see David for themselves. He said, "Bring him up to me in the bed, that I may kill him." When the messengers came in, the idol was in the bed, with the covering of goat's hair on its head. Saul said to Michal, "Why have you deceived me like this, and let my enemy go, so that he has escaped?" Michal answered Saul, "He said to me, 'Let me go. Why should I kill you?'" Okay, so what do you notice? What stands out to you?
David had very curly hair.
Curly hair. Yo, bro. Yes, Lane?
David has good friends who
Uh-huh.
come to him to
Goodness.
his aid.
Yeah,
And Saul is a very complicated person,
Yeah.
very complicated. He makes a promise and he doesn't keep it.
yeah. He is back and forth. Yeah.
I noticed again the God sent the evil spirit. It's like, that always just goes, what do I do with that?
I know.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
It's a bad use of word for our ears, you know.
Mhm.
It means what it says. It says what it means.
Okay, right.
Not buying it. There's more now.
Art, what do you notice?
Well, Debbie hit it on the head. That's what I encircled. I didn't even know it was possible that an evil spirit could come from the Lord. But I suppose it's possible. I've never heard that.
Well, in the Lord's Prayer, it says, deliver us from evil.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost as a sense of like, Jesus asking God to keep us, don't put us in the way of evil, as if he might.
Well, again, as our half Jewish brother Eddie pointed out a few nights ago, because it's in.
Week ago.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the word evil here in Hebrew can just mean troublesome or
And this translation says it's distressing.
distressing.
Mhm.
Yeah, which takes a little of the edge off. It's still problematic.
Yeah.
It still makes it seem like Saul didn't have a choice.
Like God hardening Pharaoh's heart.
Yeah, it is like that.
Right.
It's-
That-
if everything is from the Lord. I mean, if the Lord's in charge of everything, then everything is from the Lord, including lots of things. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if that's the worldview you're working on, you have to.
Fear, I will completely answer that question.
Okay,
I saw your sign. Out front. You will answer the question. You have a question what God asked.
Oh,
good.
yeah.
Ask for it.
it's like a big old dare on the street.
Right.
Thankfully, nobody on the streets reading pretending 19.
They're not reading very careful.
I should put that note on this paper or in my Bible and just say, remember, distressing.
Yeah.
Still problematic.
What did you say, Julie?
I said, still problematic.
Yes,
yes. Distressing spirit, yeah.
Would we say today if somebody had illness is that from the Lord? Would we say the Lord gave them mental illness?
I would.
I would
The Bible
not.
says it.
Okay, so that's what it says here.
He's just.
Yeah, but I'm saying, in the idea, I mean, to me, Saul is experiencing
Yeah,
breakdown.
I,
Yeah.
Like
Episodic,
fits.
yeah,
Fits.
episodic
Mm.
breakdown.
but I don't think we tend to even say mental illness, like the people that we know that are having cancer, do we say that God gave them
Right,
cancer?
right. So we're not telling a story with the same narrative
Mhm,
that this storyteller,
mhm,
right, whoever's writing for Samuel
Mhm.
is telling the story.
mhm,
But we certainly know people who might tell the story that way. and We
Mhm.
probably
Mhm.
would,
mhm,
but the narration here,
mhm,
we're really talking about the the overview narrator, whoever's telling the story is the one that's telling us
mhm,
whatever.
Yeah, and again, if the purpose of the narrative is to affirm the divine sense of David's kingship,
mhm,
then it would make sense to attribute things that diminish Saul to God. Because this is all God's work. God's working to get his chosen one onto the throne.
Right.
mhm.
So we've got to get rid of Saul here. So
I
we're
mean-
sending an evil spirit there. But I'm not saying. There are other ways of thinking about
But
it.
you could still, why did God pick Saul in the first place if he
Yeah.
knew ahead of time this was
Right.
what was gonna happen? I mean, the whole thing gets a little crazy. If you.
It does, yeah. Okay, some other things that just I noted here. So this is on page 27. Under notices. So Jonathan and Michael, both of them must choose between family loyalty to their father Saul and love for David. There's some real tension there, obviously, for both of them. And for Saul, really. Saul's plan to kill David at David's home. Towards the end of the text is the most public attempt at David's life that he's planned to this point. You know, I mean. The wheels have come off, it feels like here. I mean, he's just in a rage. And you know, what would people think of Saul if and when he succeeds in such a public attempt there? Some other noticings, David only plays a passive role here, you know, hiding. He hides in a safe or secret place while Jonathan actively talks with Saul. He's lowered out of a window while Michael is the one talking to Saul, distracting Saul, doing the weird thing with the idol. You know, David's very passive in this part here. The quickness with which Saul heeded Jonathan's words about David, like somebody over here was indicating, just, I mean, he's up and down, right? So I'm going to kill David, and Jonathan has a talk with him. He says, I'm not going to kill David. And then the next minute he's throwing a spear at David. And so, you know, just up and down. David's victory once again on the field against the Philistines. I mean, how did the Philistines make it this far? They just seem to be terrible. Terrible. The description of Saul sitting in his house with a spear in his hand. I mean, that's just a dark image there. I mean,
Yeah.
he's just ready.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like he's just got to go hunt this thing down. He's premeditated.
Shouldn't the king be leading people into battle back then? You know,
Well, certainly,
instead of sitting in his house.
and
with his
that's what the
spear.
text later will say about
Right.
David, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Back on the Philistines, David being so victorious all the time. I think in First Samuel, what stands out there, the Philistines have been clobbering Israel for a long time. Until that point, and Samuel is the successor too. But that makes David all the more remarkable.
Yeah.
If the numbers are that they quoted earlier already anywhere near the truth, I'll be dead by now. Right? Were they that popular?
Yes, a large
Right.
population.
Oh, they were.
Well, I don't know what happens in the next passage, but I'm surprised that, you know, Michael wasn't killed on the spot because she helped him get away.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, she just can't win because she tells Saul that, I guess that last sentence means that David had threatened her if she doesn't help him.
That was her story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
I didn't have a choice.
Mhm.
You know, he was holding a knife to my throat.
Maybe.
Okay, so we'll jump into some commentary here with some questions. All right, so just one general comment here from Walter Brueggemann. This is the middle of page 27. The great issue on which we are invited to reflect is the contest between the relentless will of Yahweh and the diseased but powerful will of Saul. Yahweh will have David be king. Saul will have David destroyed. So question, has there been something that happened in your lifetime that you look at and you think, yeah, that was due to the relentless will of Yahweh?
You're coming here. That's, it's the hard question to answer, but that was an answer.
That was my thought too. But I wasn't gonna say it.
That's nice.
Yeah, but yeah, it was definitely my thought too.
I would say the civil rights movement.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'd really emphasize what you said, because it had to be the relentless will of God, because there was so much resistance to it, and then they somehow still pulled it off to that point.
And
I
still,
mean,
and
it's
still,
still
and still
go,
resist.
yeah,
Yeah.
but a colossal
Yes.
resistance.
Chris,
Yes.
I have a 4-year degree from Indiana State from criminology.
Hmm.
I was a cop in Greenwich for 3 years. And I was an EMT out of Westport. And, but it seems like when I went in front of the board, it didn't matter. For somehow it didn't matter, and my door was closed. And how many times I would go behind the church by myself and cry and look at the paper where I was rejected.
Mm.
Well, only one time, but a few times. And I have to say, God had his hand in that.
Hmm.
He had to have his hand in that. I had my credentials. You knew I wanted to serve the public.
Hmm.
By all those credentials. And what happened? I don't know what happened, but I have to believe that God had his hand in there. He closed that door. And for some reason, he opened up another door for groundskeeping.
Mhm.
And one thing led to another, then the post office.
Hmm.
Well, the post office first,
Mhm.
then I got out at 11 o'clock. I said, what am I gonna do for the rest of my time? And so, and before you know it, a guy that I worked with, we teamed up and I started groundskeeping. Well, long before that, but that time it was serious. And one thing led to another. I got hooked up with lawn doctor and everything just grew.
Mhm.
I mean, blossom, my cup runneth over,
Yeah,
and
so you look at that and feel like that was the relentless will of God.
I have to believe that.
Yeah.
People say, oh, you hits up a tree, well, okay, that's all right, maybe it is. A lot of times it is. But regardless.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's a good testimony.
I think Sylvia has a good example of that where she visits this what is Shady Mountain or Shays Mountain Church of Christ about a northeastern church planning, and then like the next day her husband is transferred to White Plains.
Right. That was my blessed moment right there,
Mhm.
and I'm like, oh, this great thing is happening in a place called Stamford, Connecticut, which I'd never heard of. And then the next day, almost I'm moving there because of IBM. Thank you, IBM. So that worked out really well.
That was easy to connect the dots there.
Right.
Okay, so we'll look at 3 parts of the story: David and Jonathan, David and Saul, and David and Michael. So we'll start with David and Jonathan. The Robert Bergen. Saul's attempts began with a murderous thought back in 1811. I will pin David to the wall. Then progressed to awkward homicidal acts hidden from public view. Saul threw the spear. Saul then crafted a wider and more artful plan that involved public lies. The servants saying, "The king is delighted with you," and a small circle of people, including servants and a daughter. The circle of involvement widened when his effort failed, dropping all ruses. Saul, at the beginning of 19, now explicitly ordered Jonathan and all his servants to kill David. So you sort of see this spiral here in terms of the way in which Saul is trying to address fear of David. And so it goes from just this thought to a private action to actions that include more people and to really more something that's just public, or just about anybody might know about that. Has there ever been a time when you experienced this sort of evolution or escalation or de-evolution in your own heart life? That may be a very difficult question to answer. But we will entertain answers.
What do you mean by that? That sentence was.
Well, so when we look at Saul, it starts off with something just small, sort of this thought, well, I'm gonna pin David to the wall. And then by the time we get here to this text, Saul is sending servants to David's home to kill David. And so there's been an escalation over time. in terms of Saul's hatred of David and the way in which he expresses that hatred
And jealousy.
and jealousy. Yeah. I'll just let that sit. Okay. So top of page 28, when Jonathan heard his father's words, an internal collision occurred between the young man's love for David and his desire to please his father. First, warned, verse 2, David, by revealing Saul's intentions and timetable for murder. Next, he formulated a plan of escape for David. Finally, he proposed a plan to gather further information from the king and pass it along to David. Jonathan fulfilled his part in the plan as he spoke well of David to Saul. He urged the king to reconsider his plans for David and provided Saul with several reasons for doing so. The first reason was David's innocence. That is, he had committed no crime against the crown that would require his death. Second, on the positive side, David had been of great help to Saul by killing a dreaded enemy. Third, Saul should spare David's life to avoid committing a serious sin, that of shedding innocent blood. As a result, David was with Saul as before. For the time being, at least, David was spared by the efforts of Jonathan, the man who had perhaps the most to gain from David's death. So try to stand in Jonathan's shoes. What must this experience have been like for Jonathan? Hearing again his father's murderous intent toward David, having to come up with a plan to help David, making a case for David face to face with Saul, bringing David back to Saul. What do you think that was like for Jonathan?
It would have been so easy to just drop David. You know, I mean, it's a very remarkable story.
I mean, he does try to just be, I mean, he's just so rational as he lays this out to his father, like, you know, he's innocent, you know, shed innocent blood, he's been good to this, and he's been good for that, he's been good for Israel. He just lays, I mean, seems to be laid out so perfectly sanely, you know, and it seemed to work for a bit. Who knows how long, we don't know how much, maybe it was months, maybe it was years, you know, we just don't know.
His character stands out. I mean, you know, obviously he's doing this because he thinks it's right. You know, you know, there's no real sense. I mean, you don't know that he's just a godly guy, but that's the sense you get, that he is seeing God's plan unfold and he will protect it. You know, it's partly why you think he loves David, to the extent that he does, and why he's so willing to give up what might be his, because he sees his plan unfolding. You know, his character is just amazing.
Very much so. Yeah.
I know numbers of parents who have to keep their mouths shut because of their kids. This is one of those situations where Jonathan is articulating his mouth to his father, trying to keep his father from going down a dark hole, and it can't be prevented.
Yeah, that's good.
But you keep trying all the time.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, when somebody has like an irrational dislike of something or someone, and you try the reasoned approach, and it works for a little while, and then they go back around to it and say, I just don't like that, or I just, you know, a relative, daughter-in-law, son-in-law thing, you know, just something like that, where it just seems to grow no matter, but you can cool it down for a while, and you think you're winning, but you're often not.
Yeah. Elaine, what were you gonna say?
No, it just made me think of it's like a foreshadowing of what was it? Pontius Pilate said, when Jesus was being crucified, I see no fault in this man. And that's just what Jonathan said about David.
Right.
That's right. Yeah.
One thing that's interesting too is just the idea that, you know, because I've been sitting with this guy about the whole David was favored, and he doesn't like this at all. But it's interesting that Jonathan was not, you know, somehow he was out of the picture and he was okay because he saw a greater plan. It just seemed as though he could align with that and not be that favored guy. Despite, being of high moral character.
Mhm. Yeah, he was content to not be in the spotlight, not be the next in line for the throne, which is pretty remarkable. Yeah,
God is sparing David through all these attempts
mhm, yeah,
by Saul.
yeah.
God is protecting him.
Mhm. Yeah, so we see behind Jonathan and Michael the work of God.
Yeah.
Who has been your Jonathan?
It's really a remarkable story. There aren't really too many great parallels. But I was trying to do justice to that question. I went back to when Stanford became gender egalitarian, and the minister just up the road in the Church of Christ was trying to ban anyone from the Stanford Church going to Tidal River Christian Camp and working or no staff members from Stanford because of our position on that. And Eugene Brewer, who's probably the senior statesman of Church of Christ from Manchester at the time, came down to a board meeting and of the camp, Tidal River Christian Camp, came down to a board meeting, and the guy, I'm trying to avoid his name, but the guy was Eugene had been on that board, had been really prominent on that board. This minister makes Eugene sit out in the hall for 3 hours as opposed. I would have said, hey, well, you joined the board meeting. What could it hurt? Makes him sit out and Eugene comes down simply to argue for congregational autonomy. And it's not the business of the Tidal River Board to decide on any particular congregation and Eugene Brewer no more agreed with us than the guy did. He just thought fair is fair. And I always remember, the integrity and, putting himself out and really being treated rather shabbily himself, but still standing up.
Wow, that's a great story. I appreciate your will to embrace the named individual.
He's with the Lord now. No, I don't know.
Is he? Is he?
No, I don't know. He wasn't in that action, but yeah, that was really something. I mean, of course, we made that decision, based on our own study and our own direction. And I remember like a handwritten letter. It was like a handwritten document or something, but we didn't realize that churches had to process our decision. And that's what occurred to me, that it just wasn't us making our own. Well, I mean, that's what we did, but we never thought about what happens beyond these walls. And he was really good. I felt like I was looking at something that really centered on our Reconstruction roots. Just the basics of what the Church of Christ restoration movement was all about. He brought those out, so to speak.
Yeah, a value that they would say, well, yeah, it's pretty central to us.
Yeah.
And
incidentally, in those years, numbers of people would do things like that. We were getting grief. And I don't know the backstory of this. I barely know the man, but Joe Barnett, I think pretty well known in Church of Christ. I think he spoke for Real Truth.
Oh yeah,
And
show all the time.
he would during those years, about every 18 months without much comment at all, would send $1,000 check to Stanford. Didn't engage in Not that I know of. I mean, he might have been making these arguments to people somewhere, but whatever it was, he was basically saying, whatever it is you're doing, keep on doing.
That's great, yeah.
It's Broadway in Lubbock and Native Midlander.
Let's jump to David and Saul. So the middle of page 28. Robert Bergen again. When the Philistines once again went on the offensive, Israel's youthful commander David, as before, literally dealt them a great blow. So they fled before him. The spear in his hand, referring to Saul, the spear in his hand, served as a clear indication that Saul was having problems. Only a deeply troubled individual would sit armed for war inside the safest house in Israel. So, I mean, we've touched on this, but I'll at some point, but what do you think was going through Saul's mind and heart at this point?
He was really insecure.
Yeah.
Well, this would be a good example of saying someone's been eaten up with fear or anger.
Jealous.
You can just almost see the decay of his soul.
Yeah. Consumed by it.
Mhm.
Again, a difficult question. What has anger led you to do that you look at now and regret?
I guess I can pretty much confidently say that there's nothing I've done exclusively in anger that I thought was worth it in the end, right? I mean, that
yeah.
never works.
That's good.
I mean, I can't think of a specific thing, but I do believe that's true.
I would agree in my own life, yeah.
Moving on, unlike the previous similar incident, however, David did not remain in Saul's presence to provide him a second opportunity to take a life. He returned to his own residence and later that night would even depart the city. So what do you think is going through David's mind and heart at this point? What is it like to be David right now in this story?
God really did annoy me, right?
Mm,
And if he didn't, why is this so hard? Yeah. Sometimes I think sometimes we're on God's path, you're like, why is this still so hard?
yeah. Everything seems so clear that day that he was anointed by Samuel,
Mhm.
Yeah,
but oh
I
goodness.
think you just feel uprooted, like there was no safe spot. Because you
Yeah.
left that and then at home, that's not safe, and then you had to run for it and just. Turmoil and just.
And then he probably couldn't know who he could trust,
Right.
Who's gonna, and not everybody's gonna act as honorably as Jonathan.
There's Jonathan. Plus, anybody that helps him is in danger.
Yeah,
So,
family might not be, maybe suspect.
I mean,
Seems interesting because David isn't motivated by anger, right? He doesn't seem to be angry.
Right. Yeah. Which-
Continue respecting Saul through this.
Yes. We wouldn't blame him if he was angry. He reacted in anger. Or fear. Well, a comment by Walter Brueggemann, perhaps to speak of an evil spirit is the only way ancient Israel had to comment on an emotional illness. We should not miss the poignancy of the theological reference. Phrasing is not without analogy to the report that Yahweh had hardened the heart of Pharaoh. So we talked about it. The question is, what makes the most sense to you? That Saul was experiencing some form of mental illness, or that this was the direct result of God acting on Saul? Hands up for mental illness. Hands up for what the Bible says. It's complicated.
Well, it depends on how you look at the story. Coming from the tradition that most of us come from, the way it's written down and the way we would look at these scriptures. We're thinking that God is like dictating whatever the writer is saying, and to me, the writer is just observing what's happening and then writing down his interpretation of what's happening. As a storyteller of the unfolding of the events. So that's his interpretation of saying, God hardened his hearts and thus and such happened, and the evil spirit came over him, and he was. Not that God is actively doing those things. We are to look at the whole arc of the story and what we glean from it, not these details that we in the 21st century get bogged down in.
Yeah, I mean, because the person writing the story at the time didn't even know that mental illness existed.
Right.
They didn't know anything about mental health and disease. And so they just attributed everything to God,
Spirits.
as Kathy was saying.
Yeah.
And so I'm going with that, because
But even the mental health practitioner, I mean, it's one thing, psychosis, I mean, that is just a whole nother group of thing to deal with, but you just have a person who just has a personality disorder or is just angry. They can really get into their anger, they can really get into their anxiety and do nothing or not take the advice of other people or do the things that would help them get out of it. And that's not quite the same thing. I'm just saying something like schizophrenia or
Right.
bipolar or something like that where you're totally delusional. That's a whole different animal. But even as a mental health practitioner, I would say a lot of what I do is trying to help people take positive steps forward in their godly steps forward. First, so it's
Right.
who do you, so there is.
So in most cases, there's still choices. There's still,
yeah.
but we don't know the situation here.
Yeah.
We don't know what Saul
Mhm,
was
mhm,
dealing with.
mhm.
So,
Sounds like he has CTE from his previous battle experiences.
Mhm, mhm,
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, those people go into
mhm,
fits of rage and then they get better and they
Mhm.
seem fine, and then they have,
mhm.
fits of rage, most of them self-harm instead of harm others, but they're not king either, so,
yeah, his paranoia though, I mean, he that seems to me, yeah.
Well, it's not good to be the king.
it's always hard to be.
It is, because I mean, you're like the number one target, and if you have this underling showing you up, then maybe they'll like him better than me, and want him to be king and not me, and
Yeah, but we say that, but we have the example of Jonathan, who should be feeling
Right.
those feelings, and yet he loved David and he
Right.
was
Maybe he
happy
didn't
and
want to be king.
That's right. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that could happen.
could be.
See what happened with
But I thought about that, but it's not.
But he just seems so
it's not the biblical
gracious.
narrative story.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in here just because we're gonna run out of time, and I do want to get to Michael and her life-size idol.
Yeah, exactly. What
So-
is that?
So page 29, letter B on page 29, Robert Bergen. Then in an act, everybody see that, page 29, letter B. Then in an act that revealed as much about her spiritual condition as it did about her commitment to her husband, Michael took a teraphim, an idol, and used it to deceive Saul's cohorts. The reference here is to a teraphim, apparently a large anthropomorphic idol. It is the second one for Samuel. Ominously, the prophet Samuel previously had suggested that Saul's rebellious acts were equal to the evil of teraphim. Back to chapter 15. Through the present compelling scene and without the intrusion of didactic commentary, the writer suggests that Michael was as much a spiritual rebel as her father. This observation foreshadows an outcome for Michael's life that is the feminine counterpart of Saul's. Michael's father lost his opportunity to establish a dynasty. Michael lost her opportunity to establish a family. So why do you think Michael had in her possession a life-size figurine, which was an idol representing another ancient god or goddess?
I suppose she had it because she worships other gods, which
Yeah.
why David allowed that to be in the house, I don't know.
But I think Israel is rife with idolatry
Oh,
the whole time. The whole time. I mean, the biblical story, looking back on it is so anti-idolatry that you miss, why is it so anti-idolatry? Because there's so much of it. And so it doesn't surprise me that Michael has something.
Mhm.
She may even see it as pretty innocent. It might just be war loot,
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, she obviously takes it and uses it for something else, so,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it
Yeah.
could be warlord, could be. But I agree with you, they were pretty.
I'm struck by that. I'm struck by the idea that when Michael was supposed to marry David, Saul was hoping that she would turn David around. And now she's using the idol to fool her father in support of David. It's complicated.
It's complicated.
No.
Yeah, it's hard to think of a modern day equivalent to this because it's so surprising. But it'd almost be like going to Sunday dinner at your preacher's house. And you're eating outside on the back porch in the hot sun, and you're afraid of getting a sunburn. And so the preacher reaches in his closet and pulls out his turban. And says, here, for your turban. What's he doing with the turban?
But on the other hand, you could say, what about, you're invited over to the preacher's house after dinner and you say, when you're invited 2 days before, you say, oh, I'd love to come, but you know what? My football game is on and I cannot miss that. I just cannot miss that football game. And that's my first priority and that's what I'm doing. I'll have to take you up on lunchtime some other time. Something like that.
Right, yeah.
And it could be something else, but I'm just saying, anything that you go says, no. Church, being with the fellowship is no big deal, whatever.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. What does it mean to you that God permitted David to be saved through the use of an idol? I mean, you see any meaning in that?
Kathy?
Oh, yeah, I mean, to me, this is one of those clever trickery stories that everybody loves. It's an idol in the use of put to a silly use, not really a silly use, but to a different use. So definitely the people are over the idol, they use it for whatever they want, so, but it's an idol helping Yahweh, it's through a woman. It's very, very good.
Yeah,
Very
that's
good story. It's
That's
just a
good.
good story.
Yeah, so you have the hero of the story as a woman
Right,
who's using a pagan idol in service to God's overall plan to get David, to
Right.
protect David, so he can get the throne.
so it's almost matter how she got the full-size idol because it goes with the story, that's,
But the irony of it.
yeah, the irony. Or maybe I think like Dale said that it wasn't all that uncommon to find idols around, didn't know they were quite that big, but. And goat hair handy
Yes, Julie?
enough.
I was gonna say, it kind of reminds me of the story is, is it Rachel and Laban and she has an idol, another kind of story where this trickery and, it gets the good guys what they want. But she's carrying it around, she steals it from Laban, he's not that happy about that and.
Right, yeah, it's clear that the author is writing with that story in mind.
Yeah.
You look at the bottom of page 29, Robert Alter brings this out. Letter G at the bottom of page 29, letter G. She adopts the familiar trick used by prisoners around the world of concocting a dummy to mask and escape. But the means she chooses introduces another elaborate allusion to the Jacob story. The household gods, teraphim, are what Rachel stole and hid from her father when Jacob fled from him. Like Rachel, who pleads her period and does not get up from the cushions under which the teraphim are hidden, Michael also invokes illness to put off the searchers. Both stories feature a daughter loyal to her husband and rebelling against a hostile father. Michael puts goat's hair at the head of the bed because being black or dark brown, it would look like a man's hair, but goats and the color of their hair are also prominent in the Jacob story. Finally, cloth or garments, beged, used to cover the dummy recalls the repeated association of garments with the deception in the Jacob story. So it does seem very much that the author's thinking about the Jacob story as he or she writes this narrative for us. The other thing I just want to draw attention to is letter E, just to note sort of the positive role here of Michael. Letter E on page 29. In spite of the negative implications of the teraphim, the sequence of actions performed by Michael creates links between her and those of previous biblical heroines. In each case, these allusions identify David in particularly favorable comparisons. Jacob, too, was saved by a woman who had possession of teraphim and deceived her father. Moses also was saved through the efforts of the daughter of a wicked ruler. Furthermore, David's escape echoed that of spies saved by Rahab, who were let down through a window at night by a woman who lied to a king. So you also have all of these echoes of other women in the biblical story who played a leading role, and with about whose courage and intelligence and wisdom and craftiness, the story would have stopped.
Right, and that's the sphere in which women are in. The house, the window, the things that there's, the period,
because-
whatever, they're using what the realm they have.
Yeah.
And with their lack of legitimate power, they have
Right.
to resort to trickery.
Yeah, they do it all.
Yeah, right.
You don't have any power,
Right,
you gotta do it.
gotta do what you gotta do. You're just smart. That's all.
So a couple of questions to reflect on the back page there, page 30 by Stephen Vins at the bottom. When is it right to go against established authority in obedience to God? Because that's what Jonathan and Michael do. What other heroes from biblical times or church history have done the same? And number two, how can I recognize the drama of unplanned in my life as the unfolding of God's will for me? Certainly David planned none of this. Similarly, we endure unplanned events in our lives. How can we learn to recognize them as the unfolding of God's will for us? So we don't have time to answer those, but a couple of questions specifically. Okay, we'll stop there. Really grateful for everybody being with us tonight. Hope you have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks, Chris.
Evening.
Better.
Hi.
Well, she was fat.